Hello everyone. In this video I want to talk about the topic of leadership. In specific, my focus is on leadership as it applies to negotiations. Now leadership is always important in any negotiation because even if the negotiations are not being conducted by the leadership, so the lower level people responsible for doing the negotiations, one of the things I always talk about is the importance of setting the tone and clear direction. And if any negotiation team suffers from poor leadership, then that is where you see the effect of those poor leadership in terms of how the tone of the negotiations are conducted. In addition to that, one of the things I also highlight is that when it comes to negotiations, your failures, if you call it that, that may happen in a negotiation, are not always immediately apparent. They can take time to become obvious, years even. So this is again where failures in leadership can play a role because they translate into failure to achieve objectives, and that comes across later. And I will talk more about that in this video. So for anyone new to this channel, I am the collaborative negotiator. I have over 10 years of professional negotiation experience, and I use these videos to teach people basic and advanced skills in negotiation, and also commentary on current events and political leaders, and I will do both of that here. So let's delve right into it. So a little bit of a first thing, I'm not going to be too exhaustive about this. There are plenty of other teaching courses and academics and so on who are better qualified than I to talk about the virtues of leadership. But on this slide, I just thought I'd do a quick summation of some of the things that we might use, the words we might use to describe leaders. What do we think leadership actually means? So the first and obvious one is the ability to communicate. And this is important, of course. To be a leader, you have to lead others and you have to tell others what it is you want them to do. So communication is always one of the top things that people will say is important for any leadership. Second thing, which I consider very important in any negotiation, is respect. And I don't mean just respect because you are the boss type thing. Particularly in a negotiation, that doesn't actually cut any ice, especially if you're up against professional negotiators. Professional negotiators don't care how senior you are. If you're an incompetent boss and just throw your weight around, that doesn't actually swing things in your favor at a negotiation. When you're going up against professionals will see right through that. So one of the key things about how to show leadership at the negotiation, you have to earn everyone's respect. And you do that by persuading everyone that you're credible, that you've got skills that they should value, knowledge, and that you have an opinion that matters. Also, not at all to underestimate it, is the importance of integrity. All negotiations are based, well, nearly all negotiations anyway, are based on a certain element of trust. And if you do not believe the other side has integrity, you do not trust them. If you do not trust them, negotiations are not exactly going to be easy. So this is another important leadership thing to understand when you go into any negotiation, or even when you direct a negotiation team, is that you have to earn the respect of the people you are directing, and also the respect of the other side. And you don't do that by acting with poor behaviours. You have to demonstrate good behaviour. You have to demonstrate good competence and professionalism. So, buy-in. That's the next one. And this ties in a little bit to the communication side of things. Is that all leadership requires people to pull in the same direction. And that links into buy-in. People have to be bought into it. They can do things because you tell them to do it. They may do it reluctantly. They may do it incompetently. But if you really want to achieve stated aims and objectives, you have to devote a lot of time and effort into making sure people believe in it. And that's important in negotiation as well, for yourself as well as for the other side. You have to believe in what you're negotiating. Because if you don't, it's very hard to genuinely push the case forward. And if you're a professional negotiator, like a freelancer, for example, then of course you're not personally going to have a lot of belief. You're going to be doing it because that's the job. But the importance of securing buy-in of everyone around you doesn't go away. That is always important. So to get people to want to achieve a successful outcome. Because if they don't want to, then they'll frustrate you. So you have to push-pull people in that way. Another aspect is inspiring, of course. And you do that by setting the example and inspiring people to want to meet those standards. So now the standards have to be genuine. There have to be things that link into the other issues, like having respect and so on. If you set a standard that people really respect you for having, they will try and emulate you. And that is a lot of what leadership is setting the standard and pulling people to trying to meet that standard. And again, that's the same in negotiation. So you behave in certain ways because you want to command respect, because it helps your negotiation position, but also because you want to be someone that people look up to. Another aspect of leadership that doesn't get talked about very much, well, ability to achieve results. That should be a no-brainer, but unfortunately it isn't. People will conflate leadership with being visible, being communicator, but actually we're not necessarily look at behind the PR, shall we say, the press, the propaganda, and say, actually, does this person achieve result? Because when you dig into that sort of thing, a very different picture can emerge. So I'll talk a bit more about that later on in the video. But the other thing I also want to talk about is to emotionally connect with people. And I don't mean this in a political sense of pretending to be a man of the people type thing. That's just political theatre, and as old as time. What I mean by emotionally connect is you have to be able to communicate with people in a way that makes them feel valued. And that is equally important in any negotiation. You have to kind of emotionally connect with the other side in order to make them feel like you are interested in what they have to say. You may not be interested in what they have to say, in all honesty, but you have to communicate that emotional connection regardless. Because that is important. At the end of the day, if you're trying to talk to someone who you feel is not at all interested, then that's going to annoy you. It's going to make you more defensive. It's going to make you want to interact with that person less, or in a more confrontational type of way. So a key aspect of any leadership, which also transfers into negotiation, is the ability to emotionally connect with people to make them feel valued. And finally, and this is something that never really gets talked about in leadership, but it's absolutely essential for negotiation leadership, it's the ability to admit when you're wrong. Because this is the problem. Sometimes people conflate leadership with assertiveness, or assertiveness stroke with arrogance. And what that means is that the belief that you can never be seen to be wrong, never seen to be corrected, or ability to take that and say, you know what, yeah, that's not correct, you've proven your point, I will take that. Proper negotiation leadership will often involve compromise. You'll reach a compromise with the other side. And you'll reach a compromise with the other side because they have made a valid point that you can understand and you can connect with and say, yes, they've got a good point there, we need to address that. And part of that includes admitting that your position was incorrect or not well informed, based on wrong assumption, whatever it may be, and to say, yeah, we will accept this new information, this new data, and we'll use that to put forward a better position, to use a bit of negotiation terminology. In short, as a leader, you're always striving to do better. And this is an important thing in negotiations. Negotiations are not perfect, they're not easy. So if you have the attitude that you always try to do better, and you will take information from any credible source in order to achieve that goal, then just by that act alone, you will be demonstrating a certain level of leadership that other people will value, will respect, and will connect with. So let's go a little bit more into the very specific negotiation behaviours that demonstrate leadership. So part of that will be, of course, you need to command and give respect. You can command respect by being someone that turns up and is visibly seen to be an expert in their field. You know, competent, professional, polite, someone you can interact with, communicate well professionally. But it's also someone that must give respect. So you must do that for the other side. You must demonstrate you respect their views and their opinions. You may disagree with it, but you should try and communicate that disagreement in a way that's respectful. But equally important, you must demonstrate respect for those underneath you at any negotiation. So you may have junior people or specialist people attend a negotiation, and as a lead negotiator, it is critical that you visibly give them a high degree of respect, because that gives them credibility. That says this person knows what they're talking about, and even though I am more senior, I respect that person for the views, the skill set that they bring. And this is important to negotiation leadership, because if you're negotiating as a team, then everybody needs to pull together. And even the leadership needs to pull the people at the lower level to allow them to effectively communicate and, obtain concession, compromises, whatever the situation may be. So they need to have credibility. Now they can establish credibility themselves by what they say and what they do, but they can also have credibility by the leadership demonstrating absolute trust in them. And that is critical as well. You need to be able to trust the people doing work for you and make that visible, because that helps them to do the job better. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next point here is developing coherent strategies. Now, people will never sort of talk about this as leaders, like, oh yeah, it's just inspiring people and communicating. Well, actually, proper leadership is having a proper strategy. And you can't really secure buy-in to a vision if what you're proposing is completely and utterly bonkers and stupid. So part of the leadership skill is the ability to have achievable objectives. And one of the things I massively dislike is some people think good leadership is setting unachievable objectives to lower level people and then forcing them to try and deliver. That is a very bad leadership pattern. That is something I'm seeing increasing amounts of at the moment. And that is a certain route to failure in negotiation. It may not lead to immediate failure, but it will certainly lead to failure later on. So a crucial aspect for any negotiation to succeed, as always, are good strategies. And the leadership needs to support those good strategies and those objectives and have a good communication with the people doing all the various bits of work that support the negotiations. So the next one, critically analysis. Now this is hard to do in some ways. It's very easy to be critical of others. Say, oh yes, that person didn't communicate well, or that person got a bit emotional, whatever it may be. But if you ever want to really show leadership and be a good negotiator, one of the things you need to be able to do is to be very critical of your own performance in certain ways. This requires a high degree of self-awareness. This requires, it doesn't mean you have to be public about it. You don't have to be obvious and self-flagellating yourself about your mistakes, but you do have to have the ability to admit mistakes, even if privately, into yourself, and to be determined to take the lessons from those mistakes, to think what you can do better next time, or what you can do to fix the situation. And this is part of the problem in the negotiation circles, is that people can make mistakes early on, but if they don't have that critical analysis ability, particularly of their own performance and what they did, then they will find it increasingly harder to fix those early mistakes and to improve their negotiation position. And you can see this quite a lot in certain people will get stuck in a rut and just won't get out. And you see that a lot in negotiation circles. They've dug themselves into the ditch or the hill, and they will defend it at all costs, even though it is indefensible. So what this also means is that there's a high degree of confidence that any negotiation leader needs to have. They need to be able to have the confidence to take this criticism, and for it not to, I won't say that they can just shrug it off as if it doesn't matter, but for it not to materially, affect them. There's constructive criticism and there's destructive criticism. And good leadership is about encouraging people to give you constructive criticism so that you can improve your performance, you can improve the overall situation. And this is one of the huge problems that we'll see, is that leaders don't like to encourage criticism on people, particularly junior people. And as a consequence, key information does not get flowed upwards. And this is essential for any big negotiation, as well as general leadership. So always think about the ability to encourage other people to give you criticism and for you to receive that criticism in a positive way, because that takes a high degree of confidence in the individual to be able to do that. And a lot of people don't have that confidence, which is why they try to discourage it. And again, this is one of those behavioral traits that tends to negatively impact on any negotiation. The other bit of confidence as well is not to feel that as the leader you have to take credit for everything. You have to be willing to give credit to others. In fact, one of the key things I would argue that for any leadership that is in charge of a negotiation team or giving direction to a negotiation team, sometimes the art of leadership is stepping away, stepping into the background and letting that negotiation team take the limelight. That is, and I've covered that in other videos when I talk about things like the strategic unblocker role. But that is a hugely important thing. Any leader must not have anything that they need to prove. They have that confidence in themselves to accept that they're not perfect, and also to accept that they need to ask other people to do the job and to give credit to them when they've done the job well, rather than trying to, claim the glory for themselves. And there's no need to do that, and in fact it is very counterproductive. So as a result of all these sorts of behaviours, a good leader in negotiation is able to achieve negotiation objectives. Now note here that I do not say it's able to secure agreements or always win at negotiations or anything like that. That is not good leadership. You can do that, for example, by being a trump, by being a bully. You can perceive yourself as winning, but actually you've not really achieved the objectives. True leadership is actually pulling people towards the objectives, not necessarily towards reaching an agreement in a negotiation. You have to have a vision, you have to understand what it is, what's the good outcome that you're looking for. And if you negotiate to someone on the other side and they're not on the same page, then you need to have the confidence to be able to politely say to them, it's been really good to try and have this conversation. However, I don't think we're going to be able to take this any further. And that does not need to be a destructive or critical conversation. That can be, this does not meet our objectives and we should not, keep flogging ourselves to try and do this. And that, again, takes a high degree of leadership confidence. Because this is one of the problems, is that leaders will often get too trapped, possibly due to personal or performance objectives set by the organisation, in that they have to negotiate an outcome with the other side, even that outcome is not actually to the benefit of the organisation. That's because they got that you must have this document signed type objective, which is why I'm very anti that sort of thing. Because the whole point is not to reach an agreement, not to sign a document. The whole point is to achieve something. And you always got to bear that in mind if you want to properly lead a negotiation to a successful conclusion. So that is all the introductory blurb about leadership in negotiation. So I thought I'd talk about some current political figures and events and how we can perceive negotiation leadership as having failed in many ways. And I'm going to focus more on failure here than I am on successes, although I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And this is important because we need to learn from these examples. We need to learn that this is what negotiation failure looks like. So I start with a nice obvious one, which is Boris Johnson and all his pals whether it's Truss, any of the others, on the issue of Brexit. And we can see this in the UK press, because even the Brexit supporting press are picking up on the theme that Brexit is heading towards failure. And at the moment, the reason they've identified for that is poor leadership, which is a genuine reason. There's a very strong argument to say that Brexit is failing because of the exceedingly poor leadership demonstrated by those at the top. Now, of course, there is a strong argument that Brexit was never due to going to succeed. However, that is a different political conversation. The conversation of this video is purely about leadership. And we can see that because we look at an individual like Boris Johnson and a lot of other people at the top and think about some of the behaviour to skill sets that I talked about earlier. The ability to communicate a vision, the ability to do strategic analysis, critical self-awareness. Are those terms that you would apply to Boris Johnson and his team? I would say there's a strong argument to say that's going to be rather difficult. So that leadership failure flows downwards, and it flows into the ability of all those below that leadership to be able to deliver Brexit. And one obvious example about this, and I alluded to this earlier, is that the favoured tactic, particularly of Liz Truss, for getting trade deals signed in support of Brexit, was just to set her officials impossible objectives. Yes, get this trade deal done with Australia or New Zealand within the next few months. A ridiculously unachievable and counterproductive objective. But that was perceived as leadership by Liz Truss, obviously by the UK press, UK media as well. And we're starting to really see the obvious cracks or the failures of that leadership. There's now significant criticism about those trade agreements, even by the individuals they supported, the press, that supported those fast trade agreements in the first place. They're starting to realise that this was a stupid idea and it was badly done. So there's one obvious example of leadership failure on the strategic objectives type level. I'm going to talk a slightly different one about the communication and a slightly wider negotiation sense. And this is when I talk about Boris Johnson and now the current Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, on how they're handling the COVID pandemic. Now, whatever people's opinions on whether there should or shouldn't be lockdowns, one thing is abundantly clear. The messaging from senior leadership of government throughout the whole of the pandemic crisis has been abysmal. Let's contrast this with Angela Merkel. We'll come on to her in a little bit, but contrast her with Angela Merkel. Right from the very beginning, she stood up in front of Germany and said, we need to take this seriously. We need to change how we conduct our lives. We need to tackle all the issues brought ahead by the pandemic, and everyone needs to do their part in that regard. Boris Johnson had never communicated that in any way so clear or an effective a fashion. And as a consequence, we're still living with those failures. No one takes him seriously because no one believes he ever was serious about the pandemic. So as I say, regardless about whether you think lockdowns should or shouldn't happen, there's lots of little things that could have been done to help reduce transmission on infection rates. That would have been Boris Johnson almost having weekly press conferences, reminding people, maintain 2 meters separation, wear face masks, anything like that, a clear vision, a clear strategy on what people needed to do in conjunction with, for example, vaccines and boosters. And you can see that a little bit with how Nicola Sturgeon is doing it for Scotland. She has regular press conferences, and she will even just to say, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. These are the things we're having to think about in terms of going forward. Boris Johnson has consistently failed to do that. And unfortunately, things get a bit worse, because one of the things that irks me this particular week was that Boris Johnson did have a press conference on Wednesday to talk about the pandemic in the UK. And as I was listening to that press conference, It just seemed like a waste of time. He did not say anything useful. He did not make any major announcement. He didn't say anything that changed anything, made any impact, imparted any particular pearls of wisdom. And I couldn't understand why we were even having the press conference in the first place. I subsequently discovered later on that by amazing coincidence, Keir Starmer was also giving a speech on Wednesday night. Therefore, it would seem a bit of a coincidence that Boris Johnson decided to call a COVID press conference purely to make sure that Keir Starmer, the opposition leader, didn't get into the news and didn't have his speech reported on. So think about that for a minute. The Prime Minister managing the worst pandemic that the country has ever seen for 100 years calls a press conference just to stifle his opposition. And that's the problem. That poor messaging has completely undermined the public's faith in what the government is doing to manage the pandemic. And the fact that such a press conference is held for political purposes, not for the benefit of the country, really demonstrates an unbelievable poor levels of judgment and leadership to even think that this is a good idea. But I shall move on to that. Let's talk about some other political leaders. Let's talk about EU Commission. Would anyone describe them as having good leadership qualities? Well, that's an interesting question, because when it comes to how the EU operates, we know that they are very competent and very professional negotiators. We also know that a lot of the leadership qualities that I detailed earlier are there. They do critical analysis, they do strategy, they do objectives. That is a lot of what the Commission does. And a lot of also what the Commission does, and this is very much been lost in all the Brexit debate, is the Commission is all about setting standards. And to set standards, you need leadership. You need to communicate that, you need to enforce that, and to make people work to achieve those standards. And that is a lot of what the Commission does. So in a very dry and boring way, the EU Commission does demonstrate quite a bit of leadership. Now, this is far from perfect, of course, and they don't have great and strong personalities, I suppose. And this is possibly not a bad thing. And this perhaps leads to one of their leadership failures, which is the one thing the EU Commission cannot do by design, by systematic design, as well as by not having particularly articulate personalities at the top. They don't emotionally connect with people. And that's the big thing that's missing from the EU Commission's toolkit, as it were. People do not relate to them, do not emotionally connect, and sometimes perceive them as being poor leadership, which on occasion they are, but also doesn't necessarily value what it is they do because they don't understand it and don't connect with it. So it's important to bear that in mind. That leadership can come in many forms, not all of it visible. Let's pick a much more visible leader. Let's talk about Angela Merkel. Now, Angela Merkel is an astonishing leader because she has survived at the top of German politics for 16 years, which is, of course, an incredible achievement. I'm not particularly close to German politics, so I cannot go into any much detail on why she has been successful. What I can talk about are a few little things that I have seen and one big failure in her leadership that's going to come back by Germany. The first successful thing I want to point out is for those that might remember back to the days of the immigration crisis, when Angela Merkel stood up and said that Germany would take in those Syrian refugees. And she did that because she believed and communicated strongly the belief that that was the morally right thing to do. Now, people may disagree with that decision, and certainly plenty in the German political establishment did. However, one of the things that did for Angela Merkel is that it gave her a lot of moral authority. And that moral authority proved very useful for the ability for Angela Merkel to negotiate things on behalf of Germany. She was able to command a position because she had integrity. She was perceived as having integrity. Now, people may say in private she actually didn't, or the other hidden gremlins, whatever they may be. However, that one act that she did about Syrian refugees actually very much strengthened her ability to negotiate deals, to negotiate things on behalf of Germany, because people perceived her, in a certain way. Now, one of the things that will significantly undermine her legacy, and this is going to be a leadership failure, is the looming energy crisis that Germany currently faces. And a lot of that is because Angela Merkel was not able to communicate a proper strategic coherent vision when it came to the issue of managing Germany's energy supplies. So as I understand it, the Green Party in Germany demanded that nuclear power plants be phased out at a rapid rate. And as a consequence this year, Germany is about to phase out its power plants. At the same time, they're using more coal than any other nation in Europe. Yeah, go green, that's a great policy. And having massively increased their reliance on Russia for gas via Nord Stream 1 and the current political argument on the construction of Nord Stream 2. So this is going to be a failure of Angela Merkel to have handled those issues, to show leadership and to secure a better negotiation position for Germany, because that is going to cost Germany significantly. So Boris Johnson's handling of the pandemic is costing the UK in terms of lives. The poor handling of the UK in terms of Brexit is having significant economic costs. And so in the same token, Angela Merkel's poor handling of Germany's energy issues is going to lead to economic and political cost as well for Germany, as they will struggle to assert themselves whilst having that dependency on countries like Russia. So on that sort of theme, I'm not going to focus on a specific US president. I'm going to talk about them in a broad, abstract sense. But I know there's that saying that the US president is the most powerful man in the world, not yet been a woman, so the most powerful man in the world. That's not strictly true. This is one of the contradictions of the US presidency, is that they actually have to negotiate constantly from a position of weakness. And that is because the US Constitution deliberately puts them in that position. It deliberately makes the presidential office weaker than it would be in other countries in order to restrict power, to prevent tyranny. So think of any US president in recent years. You can think of Obama, you can think of Trump, and you can think of Biden or Bush. And they all have one certain thing in common. None of them can get everything they want. Now, some of them may not be as good negotiators as they think. That is definitely true of Trump. Others may actually be very good negotiators, very good at building consensus. And Biden is reported to have that skill. He's able to operate with both Democrat and Republicans because he is that consensus builder. Obama struggled massively with that, even though he came through a system of consensus building. So that may be due to politics, that may be due to racism. Well, a large element definitely was due to racism. But what is obvious is that the US president has to negotiate very hard with people who do not want to cooperate with the US president on the achievement of common objectives. So all those leadership traits that I mentioned before are absolutely essential to any US president. And any failures in any one of those leadership traits tend to be exploited by a political opponent and tends to massively undermine their ability to progress their agenda. So this is something worth bearing in mind. And finally, for something a little bit different, I just want to highlight the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. And the reason why I do that is because she has a very different leadership style. She has demonstrated a leadership style that appears quite compassionate, quite almost moralistic and very principled. And I wanted to highlight that. And I believe the Finnish leadership is quite similar to that in terms of style. And I wanted to highlight that because this reinforces one of my earlier points, is that you don't need to be an assertive, aggressive, alpha male type individual to demonstrate leadership. It is absolutely possible to be an exceedingly good leader while demonstrating more compassionate, more principled approach to tackling issues. Now, the political discourse will talk about this as being a separation between men and women, and that women leaders tend to adopt this approach more. No doubt there is some truth to that, but that is not an absolute truth. Anybody can behave that way. And the point I want to make here is that behaving that way can deliver benefits for you as a negotiator. If you're seen as someone who takes the principled approach, then that should give you more leverage at any negotiation. And I mean that in a positive way. So my final thoughts here, and my apologies for the length of this video. I tend to just talk for as long as it takes to get through the issues. But my final thoughts here is that think about if you are a leader yourself, or if you are leading on any particular issue, think about what sort of leader you want to be, what is important to you, and also what is important to the needs of the business, the needs of the negotiation. So think about all the behaviors and other qualities that I mentioned earlier. Now, different industries will have different emphasis on different leadership skills and behaviors. But for me, all of those that I have detailed are absolutely essential for any good negotiation, and any of those who lead negotiations and those who are leaders for negotiation teams. These are all things worth bearing in mind, and it's also worth bearing in mind the lessons of when you look upwards to look to the leaders of the organization and the leaders in political circles. Play both sides. Be able to critically analyze their performance positively and negatively, and draw all the lessons on if you're in that position and if you had perfect knowledge, how would you have tackled that issue, how would you do better, and then apply that going forward. So that's my concluding remarks for this. I hope you found this video helpful, and I shall probably do another video quite shortly on a different learning topic.